In Back to the Future, Marty McFly traveled back in time and in the process changed his timeline forever. Artists have always known that sometimes you have to go back in order to reimagine a better future. In today's episode, we meet creatives who are driven by stories from the past, reclaiming traditions that are in danger of being lost, and are carrying all of these things forward.
A one-person show where I tell the story about the relationship between my mom and I and our trip back to Vietnam.
I'm not just me, I'm me plus a whole lot of my ancestors walking with me.
Imagine my comic will give Yukon youth a sense of identity.
I'm Amanda Paris, and this is CBC Arts Exhibitionists. When we hear stories about refugees, the focus is often on why they left, the factors that drove them from their home into these new and unfamiliar countries. However, a new crop of storytellers is emerging, the children of refugees, and they're telling a different story, one focused on their return to a home they've never known. Good Morning Viet Mom explores this journey on the theater stage. Take a look.
My last name is pronounced Nguyen and not Nguyen. Vietnamese is a tonal language, so you need a special muscle to hit that sound, and that muscle is called tolerance.
And language is weird. Like, we think English is the best language because it's more convenient to be universally colonized than to challenge the dominant tongue. Like, if a cat came in here right now, you'd probably be like, yo, that's a cat. Yo, that's a cat. But why does it have to be the word cat? Why can't you be like, yo, that's a meow?
Good Morning Viet Mom is a one-person show where I tell the story about the relationship between my mom and I and how our trip back to Vietnam kind of changed everything. It was my first trip to Vietnam, and it was my mom's first time going to Vietnam after 28 years.
And I think I'm still trying to make sense of what it all means.
Chắc năm tháng này con dọn ở một mình được không?
Tôi đập đầu như dọn.
Sao vậy? Ở một con ở một mình.
Cái chọc tức mà.
Chọc gì?
Chọc mẹ giận.
Con ở một mình với con nghỉ học.
Đập đầu đó nè.
I grew up in Toronto, mainly in Little Portugal at Dundas and Dufferin. My parents are Vietnamese. They both left their towns, hopped on a boat, met in Malaysia in a refugee camp. They moved to Winnipeg, and then we moved to Toronto after I was born. I think when you go from Malaysia and Vietnam to the Winnipeg winters, it's very jarring. In some deep way, like Good Morning Viet Mom, it's like a love letter to my mom to say like, hey, this is how I think of you. A lot of the times my mom was working in a factory. Sometimes she would have her own sewing machine and make stuff at home. My parents were always fighting, and they're like, you know, they were always yelling at each other. And that's kind of a big part of the show. So when you're at home, your parents aren't talking to you because they're worried about money, and they're also angry at each other. So all their energy is used up, so you don't get the attention you need.
Asian parents don't say I love you, they say, did you eat? And I was like, that's nice. So the next time my mom called, she was like, where are you? Are you wearing a jacket? Did you eat? I was like, thanks, Mom.
Good Morning Viet Mom is it's a love story. It's a story that I think resonates with a lot of people. Being a first-generation Canadian, born here to immigrant parents, I think this story is really about trying to connect and trying to have a relationship, and all these things that get in the way of having a relationship with your parents and understanding them. It really comes from this desire to want to love better. It's also another way to look at immigrants in a different way and refugees. You know, oftentimes we hear stories of the Vietnam War. We hear the American GI side, you know, the soldier side. But we don't, what happened to all those people who were displaced and where do they end up and what do their lives become?
This feeling of loneliness or alienation or lack of connection with your parents is not just you feeling it. I think it's something that is very universal, and that there are multiple modes of communication beyond just language of conversation. It's nice that so many people have this feeling of like, I never got to talk to my parents, and your show kind of brought me closer to my parents or made me think about it a little bit more in a different way. I've had people say, hey, after I watched the show, I called my mom right away. I'm like, that's awesome. I want people to leave feeling like they've been heard, that they're understood. Because I think a lot of the times we grow up and we try to like almost scream our existence to our parents or to other people that we yearn love from, and shifting the perspective of like, well, if this person is incapable of showing love in the way that you understand it, are they showing you love in a different way?
Hi, I'm Niki Sehmbi, and I'll be your exhibitionist in residence this week. I'm a Toronto/Brampton-based artist. My work is mostly experimental. It's 3D and 2D kind of mixed together to make really psychedelic, trippy, landscapey kind of videos. But check it out, take a look, hope you like it.
Coming up, meet a dancer who brings together worlds through her choreography.
When I started to really ask questions in terms of like what it means to be a Canadian with Ghanaian heritage, I started creating. My journey hasn't just been one where I've evolved as a dancer, but I've also evolved spiritually. I'm not just me, I'm me plus a whole lot of my ancestors walking with me. Dance allowed me to discover who I am. My name is Esie Mensah, and I do Afrofusion. Afrofusion, to me, is a blend of traditional and contemporary African rhythms, specifically West African. I grew up doing dances from Ghana, and I also train in doing dances from Mali and Guinea, mixing it with samba, house, hip-hop, contemporary. As I got into it, I realized the similarities of movement between all forms. And as an artist, when I started to really ask questions in terms of like what it means to be a Canadian with Ghanaian heritage, I started creating. The move that I'm gonna be doing today is all about the hips. With Afrofusion, but it's also the connection into traditional West African. It's so connected to the hips. I want to really showcase the beauty of the hips, the beauty of the movement of whining and ticking and rolling and all of the things that should be celebrated. As immigrants in Canada, we tend to assimilate into the culture that is here. My parents sacrificed a lot to come to Canada, and I know that. You know, you leave your whole entire family to be in a place where you're by yourself. So it's almost like my duty to kind of say thank you to my parents and then also bring forward their legacy of what it is that they've gifted me with in a new way. The feeling that I get when I'm being spoken through feels like time stops only for a moment. And it's just like, okay, you've opened the gate. Okay, so now just sit back and just listen and allow us to kind of dictate what it is that we're gonna do. One of the things my guides keep telling me is that I need to still be open. It took me a long time to be able to say that out loud and not say it with tears or say it with fear or say it with shame. It took me a lot of time to get to that space where I could say it confidently and know that I'm proud of this other part of me that is asking me to do more than just dance. I am my ancestors, so I have to keep doing the work.
I swear, you can see the ancestors speaking through Esie when she dances. Jessica Coffey's family is from Newfoundland and Labrador, and she's taken that super strong East Coast pride and translated it into her tattoos of images specific to the region. Jessica is also Inuk and makes it a priority to return to a tattooing heritage that has almost been lost. Here she is to talk about continuing the legacy of these two distinct worlds.
My name is Jessica Coffey, and I'm a hand-poke tattooer based out of St. John's, Newfoundland. A lot of people come to me for what they say dainty tattoos. My process is a little less extensive than most other tattooers, especially machine tattooers. I love the bare bones of just drawing something and tracing it and kind of having to work on it with my hands. The Newfoundland images that I do, a lot of them do come from my clients. They'll want something that really shows that they're connected to their province and where they're from. Someone's like, what's Newfoundland? What can I get that really shows me that I'm home? So that's the reason I do a lot of picture plans. As well, like a lot of the icebergs that I do. The codfish is very popular because of, our province's connection to the fisheries and how important cod was for us. Some of the chefs in the city will get some of the root veggies, like just traditional Newfoundland root veggies that are grown here. My mother grew up in Hopedale, and I was born in Goose Bay, and we moved when I was only 5 years old to Newfoundland, and so there is still a big part of me that kind of calls to Labrador, and knowing where you're from is very important. I find that that's actually a very complicated topic these days. There are a lot of people kind of stuck in this middle ground with their cultural identity, and that's kind of where I fit in because I have this very rich Newfoundland culture on one side and this rich Inuit culture on the other side. So yeah, I find it's very important, and it definitely, I think, shows in a lot of my work. Getting to do Inuit tattoos really does fulfill me, and I will only do them on Inuit individuals, of course. So my Anansiak, my grandmother, she actually has tattoos on her arm. They're very faded now, but very badass and cool. Maybe around here.
In the other side of the arm?
I think that would be good. I actually take great pride in the fact that people want to get tattooed by me. The main focus is putting a piece of art or something on someone's body. What I get most out of it is actually the interaction of the whole experience. Something that I learned from tattooing and pursuing this is how to just be persistent. The first few years of tattooing were quite a struggle mentally for me, just feeling like I wasn't good enough, and so being able to overcome that and push through it, I feel like is a big strength that I've gained. Luckily, I've had a really great support group to reiterate, you're doing something good.
Coming up, meet the comic book artist inspired by punk culture and Indigenous language.
I just thought it was incredibly important to incorporate Southern Shoshone language in my book. Spent so many years learning it, I felt the responsibility to incorporate it into my work.
There are comics about everything under the sun. Pope John Paul II got his own book. There was the weird Godzilla versus Charles Barkley crossover, and of course, the series dedicated to Frank Zappa. Cole Pauls is an artist and illustrator who is making sure that amidst the superheroes, the popes, and the rock stars, Indigenous languages also have a place in comic books. Take a look.
Indigenous futurism is the concept of that colonialism didn't halt Indigenous culture. It actually made Indigenous people thrive. I'm Cole Pauls. I'm a Teltan comic artist, printmaker, and illustrator from Haines Junction, Yukon. Live in Vancouver now. I make comics about indigeneity and punk music. I've been drawing comics since I was a kid. I first self-published my own comic when I was 15. The first time I read an Indigenous comic book, I felt empowered. I felt like I was seeing myself on the page, and it made me want to do the same with my books. My first comic was Pizza Punks, which is a standalone gag comic strip about punks eating pizza. The more pizza I ate, the more ideas I thought of, the more punk music I listened to, the more I wanted to incorporate that into it. It's kind of just like a snowball effect. I just like the look of handwritten comic books. It's kind of more difficult on my end because I got to make sure that my text is legible, but it's all part of the fun. Dark Water Warriors is a language revival comic that's about two native Power Rangers, a wolf and crow, and they fight against an evil pioneer and a cyborg Sasquatch. The two main characters of Dark Water Warriors, they are like normal people, but they have the ability to protect and defend Earth because they have the technology to. So in that sense, it's like any First Nation youth could be in that Dark Water Warrior suit. I've always practiced form line. I wanted to incorporate my culture into my book more. So a lot of that just comes from me wanting to have something visually bold. And that's form line. Our two Southern Shoshone protectors of Nan observing through space, Denzut and Sin. I'm Teltan First Nation, but I was raised in Haines Junction, which is Southern Shoshone land. I just thought it was incredibly important to incorporate Southern Shoshone language in my book. Because I've spent so many years learning it, I felt the responsibility to incorporate it into my work because my dad never got to do that. My grandmother never got to do that. Cirki and Agai. You see the Southern Shoshone word, and go to the back. The language key. It's in chronological order to how they appeared in the book. I'm actually gonna return back to Pizza Punks. It's gonna be called Pizza Punks the Movie, and it's gonna be about these native punks moving from the Yukon to Vancouver, and it'll be a lot about homesickness and like culture shock. How are you?
Good.
Dockwater Warriors collection's coming out in November.
Sounds good to me.
Be all 3 issues in one.
Yeah.
Imagine my comic will give Yukon youth a sense of identity. The fact that it's collected in a book that is easily obtainable and easily read, the importance of that is tremendous because I can share my culture with anyone now. If we make it into books, we make it into comics, you know, we can make our culture thrive.
In most movies about time travel, changing the timeline can lead to catastrophic events. But as we've seen today, artists have the ability to change the future for the better by creating new ways of remembering, reclaiming traditions that were once lost, and opening themselves to the guidance and voice of ancestors. If you know any artists that you think should be featured on CBC Arts Exhibitionists, send me a message on social media. Our handle on all platforms is @CBC Arts. Tune in next week for another deep dive into the transformative world of Canadian art. Peace.